Okay, this video is going to be a run through of the final exam review that you were handed out in class yesterday. That would have been the 12th of December. This is going to be in 2 or 3 parts just to keep the size of the video smaller. And I apologize if there's an echo coming through. That's just the only way I can record. Okay, so let's go question by question. All right, question number 1. For a car traveling at a speed of 50 miles per hour, the relationship between the distance traveled d and the time traveled t is described by the function d equals 50t. Which statement is true? Statement A says the time traveled depends on the distance traveled. B says the speed of the car depends on the distance traveled. C says the distance traveled depends on the time traveled. And D says the speed of the car depends on the time traveled. Well, if we look at our function, speed is not an issue here. The speed is actually constant, 50 miles per hour. So in this function here, d equals 50t, I like to think of it as, y equals 50x. When you have an isolated variable, like the d, then that's your y value. That's going to be your dependent variable. And x is your independent. Variable. So in this case, that means that t is independent, d is dependent. So distance depends on time traveled. So that's going to be C. We can rule out B and D altogether because the speed of the car doesn't depend on anything. It's stated as fact at the beginning. So your choice is really between A and C. And time is not a dependent variable here. It's an independent variable. All right, on to question 2. During their European vacation, the Oswald family took a train ride through the Alps aboard the Glacier Express. They traveled 185 miles in 5 hours. What is the train's average speed? Well, this is actually going to use the equation from the first problem. D equals RT, distance equals rate times time. And we're looking for speed, which is a rate. So distance equals speed times time, or rate times time, but we want to actually find out what the speed is, so I would divide both sides by t to get that r by itself. So distance divided by time equals rate. So the distance, 185 miles, divided by 5 hours, 185 miles divided by 5 hours equals 37 miles per hour, which is C again. Question 3 asks, which of these is equivalent to the equation below? We got y equals mx plus b for the equation. Since this is not a select all that's equivalent, it says which of these, so I'm looking for the first one. And so the way I would do the problem is I would try to make the original look like this one first. And if I get there, I select it and I'm done. I don't need to worry about any of the rest. So let's try to make this equation look like this one. So the way they're different is the b's isolated. So in here, if I wanted to get the b by itself, I would subtract mx from both sides. And I get y minus mx equals b, which is the same thing as b equals y minus mx, which is this equation. So I can select A and be done with the question. I don't need to worry about these other ones. If it were a select all, then I would have to try that with each one of them, but since it's which of these, then select the one that works, and you're done. Question 4. What is the distance between points 5, 5 and -1, -3 in the xy plane? Okay, so you need to know your distance formula. And the typical distance formula has x sub 2 minus x sub 1 squared plus y sub 2 minus y sub 1 squared, which is fine. I like to think of it as the change in y, or sorry, the change in x squared plus the change in y squared. And that makes the formula a little bit easier to remember. Okay, so if I look at my x's, how far away is 5 from -1? Well, it's 6 units away. How far away is 5 from -3? Well, that's 8 units away. So now I have the square root of 6 squared is 36, and 8 squared is 64, which is square root of 100, which is equal to 10. All right, question 5. There are 3 boys to every 5 girls in Mrs. Kennedy's class. If there are 40 students in the class, how many of those students are girls? Okay, you've got to be careful here. This is a ratio problem, but it's not. The students here these are boys and girls. So what I want to do is I want to make a ratio of girls, since that's what we were looking for, girls over boys and girls, and equals the same. So if there are 3 boys to every 5 girls, there are 5 girls, and then 3 boys plus 5 girls, there are 8 students. That's our ratio. And I want to know if there are 40 students, and if that ratio continues, what is the number of girls? So you can cross multiply and all that stuff if you want, but 8 times what equals 40? Well, 8 times 5 equals 40. So if I just multiply this times 5, I get the number of girls if there are 40 students. Okay, we've got 2 equations. Determine which statement best describes the graph of the equations. Okay, so the first thing I noticed, they're y equals mx plus b. These are lines. Their slopes are negative reciprocals of each other, which means that if I take the slope 4, 7, and if I flip it over and change the sign, it becomes -7/4. Those are negative reciprocals. That means these 2 lines are perpendicular. Alright, so let's read through the statements here. 2 lines given by the above equation intersect, they do, but are not perpendicular. Well, nope, we know they are. B says the 2 lines given by the equations above are perpendicular. Yes. C says the 2 lines given by the above equations are parallel. Nope. And D says the 2 lines given by the above equations are coincide.
Lewis, go ahead.
All right. Well, yeah, they do coincide at one point, not at every point. So the best statement here is going to be B. Question 7 says, which of the following describes the number below? We've got the number pi. And pi is a real number, and it is irrational. So let's look through our options here. Real and rational, no, because it's not rational. Rational, no, and irrational. Something can't be both, so that's a no. Real number and irrational number, yes. Irrational number only. Well, it's not only irrational, it's also real, so the best answer to choose there is C. All right, for question 8, we've got a simplified question, and it looks like a monomial over a monomial. And if we look at our answer choices here, it's pretty simplified, most of them. There's still some parentheses left, so we can just simplify this as best we can and then see if it matches one of these. So one thing I notice is that the x's here can be combined. So x to the third times x to the sixth, that's x to the ninth. Then we have a y to the ninth, and this z to the negative 4 to the seventh would be z to the negative 28. And then on the bottom, x, y to the third would be the same as x to the third, y to the third. So that doesn't quite match anything we've got here just yet, but we can still do some simplifying. There's some canceling that can happen here, and some canceling that can happen here, and this can move to the bottom. So let's do that. So x to the ninth divided by x to the third, that's the same as x to the sixth on top. And the same thing with the y, so that'll be y to the sixth on the top. We'll move the z to the bottom as a positive 28. All right, so let's look at our answer choices now. A has a z to the 11th, so no. B has the z to the 28 on the bottom, but it has xy to the 12th on the top. That's not going to work. C has everything in the denominator. Well, the x's and the y's are in the numerator with a positive exponent, so that's not going to work either. So it's got to be D, and in fact it is. The only difference between D and what I have up here is they combine the x, y, and gave it a single exponent, which is completely legal. We can do that. And there you have it. All right, last one for this video. From a shipment of 250 light bulbs, a sample of 50 was selected at random and tested. If 10 light bulbs in the sample were found to be defective, how many defective light bulbs would be expected in the entire shipment? Okay, so we've got 10 defective ones out of 50. We want to extend that to if we were looking at 250. So this is a proportion. We can cross multiply if we want to, but the numbers here are simple enough that I can see that 50 times 5 is going to give me 250. So 10 times 5 is going to give me 50. All right, that's the end of video 1. You can now move to the link for video 2.